Imagine this. You're standing alone on the deck of an ancient ship, surrounded by nothing but the endless, dark sea. The sky is a deep shade of black, with clouds swirling ominously above. The waves crash relentlessly against the hull, their sound echoing in the empty space, and there's a mist hanging in the air, so thick you can barely see a few feet in front of you. It's silent, too silent. Only the ship's old wood creaks, like whispers from another time. There's an unsettling feeling that the ocean itself is alive, watching, waiting. Now, have you ever heard of a ghost ship? A ship lost to the sea, cursed to drift in eternal darkness, carrying the souls of sailors who vanished without a trace. I want to know, where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments below, and let's dive into a tale that has terrified sailors for generations. They say this story began over a century ago. A ship, known as the Sea Widow, disappeared one stormy night without a trace. It was a vessel feared by even the bravest sailors. Her crew was known for taking on voyages to the most treacherous waters, through storms and high tides, laughing in the face of danger. But one night, everything changed. Just as they crossed into a stretch of sea known as the Devil's Breath, thick fog rolled in, thicker than anything they'd ever seen. Shadows moved in the mist, but no one could tell what they were. Some said they saw faces. Others heard faint, chilling whispers calling them by name. One by one, the crew members started to go mad. They claimed to see things no one else could, visions of lost souls, and phantom lights flickering just beyond reach. Even the captain, a man who was rumored to have survived the worst storms, was shaken. They say he locked himself in his cabin, clutching an old faded letter. A letter from a sailor long lost to the sea. Days turned into weeks, and the fog never lifted. Supplies dwindled, hope faded, and soon, all that was left on the Sea Widow was fear, and the strange haunting melody that seemed to come from the sea itself. No one knows for sure what happened next, but one thing is certain. The ship was found drifting years later, empty, with no sign of life on board. And yet, if you find yourself out on the water late at night, some claim you can still hear the sound of their voices carried on the wind. They say the lost crew of the Sea Widow is still searching for a way back, waiting for someone to join them in the endless dark abyss of the sea. Years passed, but the legend of the Sea Widow haunted every sailor who dared to venture into those waters. Some dismissed it as an old sailor's tale, nothing more than a story meant to scare newcomers. But others, well, they swore by its truth. Fishermen claimed to have seen a ship covered in seaweed and barnacles, drifting silently through the mist. Its sails were torn, the wood rotting, but from afar, they could make out faint figures moving across the deck. Those brave or foolish enough to get close reported hearing whispers, voices calling them by name, pleading, warning them to turn back. One night, a young sailor named Lucas from New England set sail with his crew on a mission to uncover the truth. Lucas was known for his courage, even a touch of arrogance, as he laughed off the stories of ghost ships and curses. But as they neared the Devil's Breath, a heavy silence fell over the crew. The water stilled, the sky darkened, and a thick fog rose from the sea, just as the old stories had said. As they pressed forward, something caught Lucas's eye. There, through the mist, a figure stood on a ship's deck, watching them, its eyes empty, hollow, staring straight into Lucas's soul. A sudden chill swept over him, and for the first time, he felt the cold grip of fear. His crewmates, who had been laughing only moments before, fell silent, transfixed by the ghostly vessel that appeared just meters away. The crew couldn't look away. The ship was unlike any they had seen. The wood seemed ancient, twisted, covered in strange markings, and the sails were a deep, sickly shade of gray. It was the Sea Widow. Lucas could hardly believe it, but the proof was right there, staring back at him. Just as he thought to turn back, the faint sound of a melody floated through the air. A haunting, sorrowful tune, like the echo of an old sailor's song. It seemed to come from all around them, wrapping them in its dark embrace. Suddenly, voices whispered through the mist, growing louder with each second. Lucas heard his name, spoken in a voice he didn't recognize, but it felt familiar, as if he'd heard it before. The whispers became pleading, desperate, as if the voices were trapped souls calling out for help. Then, a deep voice cut through the noise, chilling Lucas to his core. It was the captain's voice, low and filled with sorrow. "Leave this place," it said. "We're cursed, and now, so are you." Panic swept through the crew as the fog thickened, surrounding them until they could no longer see the horizon. The whispers grew louder, merging into screams that echoed around them. Lucas tried to move, but his feet felt like they were frozen to the deck. The haunting faces of lost souls floated past him, their eyes wide with terror, as if they were reliving their last, horrifying moments on the Sea Widow. Then, as quickly as it had come, the fog began to lift. The whispers faded, and the ghostly ship vanished, leaving Lucas and his crew trembling, staring into the empty sea. But something was different. Each of them felt marked, as if the shadows had left a piece of their curse behind. They turned the ship around, desperate to escape, but even as they sailed away, they could still hear the faint echoes of the cursed crew, their pleas fading into the distance. "Now, tell me, if you were in Lucas's place, would you turn back? Or would curiosity pull you forward, deeper into the unknown?" Days passed after Lucas and his crew returned to port, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them back. Strange things began to happen on their ship. Tools would go missing, ropes would untie themselves, and each night they'd hear faint footsteps echoing on the deck, as if unseen figures were pacing restlessly. One night, Lucas awoke to a cold breeze sweeping through his cabin. At the foot of his bed, he saw a figure, a man, dressed in tattered clothes with skin as pale as the fog that had surrounded the Sea Widow. The figure's eyes were hollow, lifeless, staring deep into Lucas as if piercing through his soul. It opened its mouth, and a voice, raspy and broken, whispered, "You were warned, but you didn't listen." Lucas tried to shout, but his voice was frozen in his throat. The figure stepped closer, reaching out a hand as cold as ice, leaving Lucas paralyzed in his bed, feeling the weight of something ancient and dark pressing down on him. As the ghostly figure faded, it left behind a chilling message. The curse is now yours to bear. From that night on, Lucas's life changed. Shadows seemed to follow him everywhere he went. Even in broad daylight, he'd catch glimpses of figures just out of sight, watching, waiting. His dreams became nightmares, each one more vivid than the last, filled with the haunting voices of the cursed crew, begging for release, calling him back to the sea. Desperate, Lucas sought out the oldest sailors in the port, hoping someone might know how to break the curse. He met an old man who had heard whispers of the legend, a man who claimed to have once seen the Sea Widow himself and lived to tell the tale. The man leaned in close and told Lucas, in a hushed tone, "Once marked, the only way to break the curse is to return to where it began. You must find the Sea Widow again and face the spirits that dwell within it." But there was a catch. Lucas had to go alone. without his crew. The spirits demanded only him, the one who had dared to look upon the cursed ship with arrogance. Reluctantly, Lucas agreed, knowing it was his only chance to free himself from the relentless hauntings that had taken over his life. And so he set out once more into the unknown, back to the waters that had nearly swallowed him. Night fell, and as the fog closed in around his small boat, Lucas felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine. Shadows twisted and shifted in the mist, forming ghostly figures on the waves. The haunting melody began to play again, louder this time, pulling him deeper into the dark waters until, through the fog, he saw it. The Sea Widow, waiting, its sails torn but standing tall like a phantom of the sea. As Lucas climbed aboard, the whispers started again, louder and more desperate, filling the air with cries of those who had been lost for centuries. The captain's voice echoed above the others, cold and hollow. "You should have heeded our warning. Now you are one of us." With every step, Lucas felt the weight of the curse growing, sinking into his bones, making it harder to breathe, harder to move. He called out, pleading for mercy, for freedom from the ship's haunting grip. But there was only silence, and the endless, piercing stares of the cursed crew. Now here's the question. If you had been warned, would you have returned to the ship? Or would you have tried to live with the curse, knowing it might drive you to madness? Tell us in the comments. And remember, if you ever find yourself at sea, beware the ghostly whispers that drift across the waves. You never know what lies waiting in the fog. Lucas's breath came in ragged gasps as he walked the deck of the Sea Widow, each step making him feel as if he were sinking deeper into a bottomless pit. The air was thick with an unnatural cold, the kind that chilled to the bone. Around him, the shadows of long-lost sailors emerged from the mist, their faces frozen in eternal agony, their hollow eyes fixed on him with a silent, haunting accusation. He called out to them, his voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" But the only response was the eerie, slow creaking of the ship's wood, as if the vessel itself was alive, responding to his question. The captain's ghostly figure materialized before him, his eyes empty, yet full of something dark and unfathomable. With a voice like a distant echo, the captain spoke. "You sought the truth. Now you'll know the price." Without warning, the deck shifted beneath Lucas, and he felt as if the ship was pulling him downward, dragging him into its cursed depths. He stumbled, trying to keep his balance, but the mist around him thickened, almost alive, pressing in from all sides. The faint sounds of screaming filled the air, cries of sailors who had been trapped here for centuries, echoing through the void. It felt as if the very souls of the lost were reaching out, clawing at him, desperate to escape their prison. As he looked around, Lucas's mind began to fracture. Memories that weren't his flashed before his eyes, scenes of betrayal, storms, violent deaths, each vision more horrific than the last. He saw glimpses of sailors who had been cast into the sea, dragged beneath the waves by unseen forces, condemned to drown in darkness. The ship wasn't just cursed, it was a collector of souls, bound by the promises of those who perished aboard it. Lucas staggered to the edge of the deck, his vision blurring as he clutched the railing, looking out into the endless, dark sea. There, just below the surface, he saw hundreds of faces of those trapped in the cold, black water, their mouths open in silent screams. He realized that they were watching him, waiting for him to join them in their eternal nightmare. But then he remembered the words of the old sailor who had warned him. The curse can only be lifted if you face the spirits. Summoning every ounce of strength left in him, Lucas turned back to the crew's ghostly figures, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me, how can I break the curse?" The captain stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the darkness of the sea. "To break the curse, you must free us," he said. "But freeing us means you take our place." Lucas felt a surge of panic. He'd come to escape the curse, not to become its next victim. But as he looked into the hollow, despairing faces of the lost sailors, he understood that there was no escape for him now. Only a choice. He could leave them, knowing he'd be haunted forever, or he could make the ultimate sacrifice. As he weighed his options, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, pleading for release. The spirits gathered around him, their eyes filled with a desperate, haunting hope. And in that moment, Lucas knew what he had to do. Taking a deep breath, he spoke the words that would seal his fate. "I'll stay," he whispered, "but let them go." The air stilled. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, one by one, the spirits began to fade, their tortured faces softening, released from their curse at last. The captain gave Lucas a nod of solemn respect as his own form dissolved into the mist, leaving Lucas alone on the deck. With a heavy heart, Lucas felt himself merging with the ship, becoming part of its cursed essence. He was now the Sea Widow's keeper, condemned to wander the dark waters, waiting for the next lost soul to board and free him from his own haunting fate. And so they say, the Sea Widow still drifts through the foggy seas, an empty vessel with only a single figure on its deck. A figure with hollow eyes, waiting, watching, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to seek out the truth and release him from the curse. Now tell me, would you be brave enough to board the Sea Widow if it meant freeing the lost souls? Or would the fear of joining them forever keep you from setting foot on that cursed ship? Share your answer below, and remember, some mysteries of the sea are best left unsolved. As the Sea Widow drifted through the foggy waters, Lucas felt a strange calm settle over him, though he was now bound to the ship's eternal curse. His mind was filled with the sorrowful memories of the countless sailors who had suffered under the same fate. He tried to recall the faces of his crew, the ones he had left behind to return to this forsaken ship. But their features grew distant, blurred, like images in a fading dream. All that remained was the sea, stretching endlessly around him, and the ship's faint, ominous creaks that echoed like ghostly sighs. Days and nights blurred together as he sailed through mist and darkness, drawn by forces he couldn't see, but could somehow sense. He was no longer a mere man. He was part of the Sea Widow, bound to its planks and sails, cursed to roam until another soul dared to set foot on its deck and release him. Time passed, and the world outside moved on, but Lucas remained, a shadow on an empty ship. Years, perhaps centuries, drifted by. Lucas became accustomed to the haunting silence and the isolation, but he never stopped hoping that someday someone would come and free him. He found himself whispering into the mist, calling to the sailors he could sense on the horizon. The sea became his only companion, its depths holding secrets darker than he had ever imagined. And then, one cold, moonless night, he saw something through the dense fog. The lights of a ship approaching. A glimmer of hope flickered within him, a chance for release. The ship grew closer, and Lucas stood at the bow, watching as its shadowy figure came into view. He felt the pull, an almost magnetic force drawing him toward the vessel. As it neared, he saw faces on the deck, sailors peering into the mist with anxious expressions, as if they sensed the presence of the Sea Widow lurking nearby. He tried to call out to them, but his voice had become as faint as the wind. The sailors glanced around, whispering to one another, eyes wide with fear. One of them, A young man with a determined gaze looked directly at Lucas. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he could see him, as if he were staring into the very depths of his soul. Lucas tried to communicate, his thoughts reaching out like tendrils of mist, pleading for the stranger to board the cursed ship. But the young sailor shook his head, backing away, his face pale. He turned to his crew, whispering hurriedly, and they steered away, leaving the Sea Widow alone once more. Lucas's hope crumbled into despair as he watched the ship disappear into the fog, leaving him trapped in eternal solitude yet again. Years passed, and the curse held its grip over him, each passing moment stretching into an endless, haunting eternity. Lucas began to lose all sense of self, becoming a mere shadow within the fog, his memories fading into the endless night. And still, the sea whispered to him, a constant reminder of his fate. Every so often he would see a flicker of light in the distance, another ship daring to venture close, and he'd reach out, hoping someone might be brave enough to board and free him. To this day, sailors tell stories of the Sea Widow, of the lone figure seen standing on its deck, staring out across the waters, waiting. Some say it's the ghost of a captain who betrayed his crew, while others believe it's a soul who sacrificed himself to release those trapped in the curse. But all agree on one thing: the ship is an omen of doom, and those who see it are wise to turn away. Only the foolish would dare board it, for those who do may find themselves bound to its curse, trapped forever in its unending journey through the fog. And so, the Sea Widow sails on, an eternal ghost ship with Lucas aboard, waiting, hoping that one day someone brave enough will set foot on its cursed deck and finally set him free from the curse's relentless grip. But until then, he remains, a silent shadow in the mist, haunted by the whispers of the sea. As Lucas stood, a solitary figure on the phantom ship's deck, time lost all meaning. The waves beneath him rolled in a rhythmic lullaby of dread, whispering tales of forgotten souls and sailors lost to the dark. His thoughts blended with the shadows, twisted memories of his past life, seeping through the cracks of his consciousness. He could feel the ship pulsing with life, or something like it, a sentient force woven into every plank, every creak. It wasn't just a vessel. It was an entity, one that thrived on fear and fed off souls too bold or too curious to turn away. One misty dawn, as the faint light of day struggled to pierce the dense fog, Lucas spotted another ship on the horizon. His hollowed heart lurched with hope and fear, knowing that this could mean another chance at freedom, or another cruel reminder of his endless fate. This ship was different, though. It had an air of defiance about it, a silent determination that set it apart from the others that had turned away. As it drifted closer, Lucas could make out the crew on deck, their faces blurred yet resolute. One figure caught his eye, a young woman, her gaze fierce and unyielding, as if she could feel his presence, sense the darkness that clung to the Sea Widow. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, Lucas felt a strange shift. She wasn't looking at him with fear, but with something almost like recognition. The young woman turned to her crew, speaking in hushed tones. Lucas couldn't hear her words, but the crew's nervous glances toward the cursed ship said it all. They were hesitant, but her unwavering resolve seemed to overpower their doubt. She was determined, even as the mist thickened, as the eerie silence settled over them. Lucas's mind raced, trapped between hope and despair. Who was this woman? Why did she look at him as though she understood his fate? His spirit trembled, a faint echo of who he once was, clinging to a single thought. Perhaps she could end this, lift the curse, and set him free. As the woman's ship drew nearer, the fog around the Sea Widow thickened, as if trying to shield itself. protect its cursed secret from the prying eyes of the living. But the woman stood firm, undeterred, and called out into the silence, her voice steady. "Are you the one they speak of? The one bound to this ship?" she asked, her voice cutting through the mist like a blade. Lucas's voice was no more than a whisper, barely audible, yet somehow she seemed to hear him. "Yes, I am the one cursed to sail these waters." The woman took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "I came here to break the curse, but only if you tell me the truth. Who cursed you? Why does this ship claim so many souls?" For the first time in centuries, Lucas felt something other than despair. This woman was different, driven by a fierce curiosity, a hunger for answers that matched his own long-lost resolve. He knew he couldn't lie. This was his only chance, and the truth was his last tether to humanity. It was betrayal, Lucas said, his voice thick with the weight of his confession. "The crew, my friends. I let them down, abandoned them to the depths to save myself. But the sea has a way of punishing cowards. The Sea Widow cursed me, bound me to her, to wander these waters until my debt was paid." The woman's expression softened, but her determination did not waver. "Then tell me, how do I free you? Is there a way to break this cycle?" Lucas hesitated, the fear clawing at him. He had spent countless years trapped, wishing for this moment, and now that it was here, he realized he didn't know if freedom was truly possible. But he clung to a single hope, a desperate gamble. "You must take my place," he whispered. "Only by binding your soul to the Sea Widow can you release mine. But know this, the ship will demand a price. It always does." The woman paused, her face unreadable. The crew behind her murmured in anxious whispers, but she silenced them with a glance. She stepped forward, her hand reaching toward the Sea Widow, as though she could already feel the weight of the curse pressing down upon her. "I accept," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes held a hint of fear. "I will take your place." A strange calm settled over Lucas, a peace he hadn't felt in centuries. As the woman crossed the invisible boundary, her fate sealed, he felt the ship release its grip on him, felt himself unraveling, fading into the mist. But just before he vanished, he whispered one final warning. "Beware. The sea never forgets." And with that, Lucas disappeared, leaving the woman alone on the deck of the Sea Widow, the new keeper of its endless curse, bound to wander the seas, awaiting the next soul daring or foolish enough to seek her out. Now, the legend of the Sea Widow lives on, and they say, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint whisper of Lucas's warning drifting across the waves. Would you dare approach the ghost ship, knowing it holds the souls of the damned? Or would you turn back, leaving its secrets lost in the mist forever? Share your answer below, if you dare. As the days turned into nights aboard the Sea Widow, the young woman, now the ship's new keeper, felt the weight of her choice pressing down on her. The crew, once eager to explore the mysteries of the ocean, now stood frozen in fear, their eyes darting nervously toward her. They could sense the change in the air, the ship's ominous presence pulsating like a heartbeat beneath their feet. At first, the woman tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but it quickly became apparent that the Sea Widow was not just a ship. It was a living entity that thrived on despair. Whispers echoed in the night, eerie voices calling to her from the depths, tales of those who had come before her, their spirits eternally bound to the cursed vessel. Every night, the fog rolled in thicker than before, and shadows danced along the deck, twisting and turning in a macabre waltz. The young woman felt them watching, felt their pain echoing within her. Each day became a battle against the consuming darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. She could no longer distinguish between her thoughts and the whispers of the trapped souls, each one urging her to let go, to give in to despair. But she was determined. If Lucas had sacrificed himself to free her, then she would find a way to break the curse once and for all. She began to explore the ship, delving into its hidden chambers, uncovering secrets long forgotten. There were ancient maps, tattered journals filled with tales of shipwrecks and betrayal, and tokens left behind by those who had once sailed these treacherous waters. Then, one stormy night, as lightning illuminated the darkened sky, she stumbled upon a hidden room deep within the bowels of the Sea Widow. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, pulsating with an otherworldly glow. At the center of the room lay a chest, bound in rusted chains, its surface etched with the names of sailors who had come before her. With trembling hands, she opened the chest, revealing a glowing crystal that pulsed with energy. This was the heart of the ship, the source of its power. She understood now. To break the curse, she had to confront the very thing that had imprisoned so many souls before her. But doing so would require a sacrifice greater than she could have ever imagined. As she held the crystal, she felt the weight of countless souls pressing upon her, their grief and sorrow washing over her like a tide. She knew that to set them free, she would have to merge her essence with the ship, becoming a part of it for eternity. In that moment, she made her decision. She would not let their sacrifices be in vain. She would not allow the cycle of suffering to continue. With a deep breath, she placed the crystal back into the chest and began to chant the incantation she had deciphered from the journals. The ship trembled, a low moan echoing through the water, as if the Sea Widow itself understood her intent. The mist thickened around her, swirling with fury, but she stood her ground. The winds howled, the sea roared, and for a brief moment, she could see the faces of the lost sailors appearing around her, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. They reached out, their hands brushing against her, their whispers becoming a chorus of hope. "Set us free," they cried, their voices blending into a powerful storm. With one final shattering scream, the ship erupted in a blinding light, the crystal at its core shattering into 1,000 pieces. The darkness that had enveloped them began to dissipate, and she felt herself pulled into the light, the warmth enveloping her like a comforting embrace. In an instant, she was no longer alone. The souls of the lost sailors surrounded her, their laughter ringing in her ears as they ascended into the heavens, freed at last from their torment. She had done it. She had broken the curse. But as she began to fade into the light, a part of her remained tethered to the Sea Widow, forever bound to the vessel that had once held her captive. She understood now that she would always be a guardian of the sea, watching over those who dared to traverse its treacherous depths. And so, the Sea Widow transformed into a beacon of hope, its ghostly form now a guiding light for lost sailors, leading them safely to shore. The legend would live on, whispering tales of bravery and sacrifice, reminding all who sailed the waters of the bond between the living and the dead. Now, if you ever find yourself out on the open sea, and you see a flicker of light piercing through the fog, remember this tale, for it might just be the Sea Widow guiding you home, or perhaps leading you into a deeper mystery. Would you dare to follow the light? Or would you turn away, forever haunted by the questions left unanswered? Share your thoughts below. And remember, the sea always holds its secrets close. Have you ever felt the cold grip of death before it even comes. The moment when the air around you chills, and you just know something isn't right. This is how it all began. A quiet night on the open sea, stars shimmering above, the waters calm, but no one aboard, the ravens cry, knew that this would be the last peaceful night they'd ever experience. My name is Jack Coleman, and I was part of that ill-fated crew. I've never spoken about what happened that night, but now I think it's time you know the truth. The story of Captain Sybil Blackwater, the infamous pirate queen, and the curse that haunts anyone who dares to speak her name. She wasn't just any pirate. She was a terror of the seas, commanding her fleet with unmatched cruelty. But what set her apart from all others wasn't her hunger for gold or her thirst for blood. No. Sybil made a pact with the sea witches, ancient beings, forgotten by time, who ruled the darkest parts of the ocean. And it's that curse that cursed our souls forever. Do you believe in curses? If you don't, you soon will. It was a stormy night when we first heard of the treasure. Rumor had it, a chest filled with gold, silver, and jewels, all guarded by the spirit of the pirate queen herself, lay buried deep beneath the waves, hidden within the jagged rocks of Dead Man's Reef. Every pirate who tried to claim it never returned. Their ships were found abandoned, torn apart by forces no one could explain. Some said the sea itself swallowed them whole. But those were just stories, right? Or so we thought. We were a crew of 12 aboard the Raven's Cry, led by Captain Richard Fenton. He wasn't a man who feared legends. No, he sought them out. And the treasure of Sybil Blackwater, that was his ultimate prize. He believed the curse was nothing more than a sailor's tale, something to scare away fools. But when greed blinds a man, he stops seeing the world for what it truly is. The first sign that something was wrong came the night before we reached Dead Man's Reef. The wind died, the sea turned eerily still, and a thick fog rolled in out of nowhere, swallowing the horizon. We were surrounded by nothing but silence. Then came the whispers. Jack, Jack, can you hear me? We're waiting. I'll never forget the sound of it, like 100 voices speaking at once, faint but clear. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but when I looked around, I saw the fear in the eyes of the other men. They heard it too. Captain Fenton laughed it off. But I could see the unease in his eyes. He wasn't as fearless as he let on. But pride is a dangerous thing. It pushes men to do foolish things. And that's exactly what Fenton did. He ordered us to keep sailing straight into the fog, straight into the heart of the curse. That's when we saw it. A ghostly ship appeared through the mist, its sails tattered, the wood rotting and covered in barnacles, as if it had been at the bottom of the ocean for centuries. It was drifting toward us, silently, without a crew. We all stood frozen, unable to move, as it came closer and closer. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. One of the men, Thomas, dropped to his knees, clutching his head as if something was inside it, tearing his mind apart. He started mumbling, talking about her. Sybil Blackwater. How she was coming for us. How the sea witches would drag us all down to the depths. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. Thomas collapsed, lifeless. And that was just the beginning. One by one, the crew began to change. They'd start hearing the whispers, seeing shadows in the corners of their eyes that disappeared the moment they turned. It felt like the ship itself was alive, watching us, playing with us. Captain Fenton, though, refused to turn back. He was obsessed. The treasure was all that mattered to him now. Even as men started disappearing in the night, first George, then Michael, he pushed forward. He convinced himself it was all in our heads. It's the fear that's killing you, not some old ghost, he'd yell. But deep down, we knew better. The night we reached Dead Man's Reef was the last night I slept as a sane man. The fog thickened, and the sea beneath us grew black as ink. The temperature dropped so low you could see your breath in front of you. And then, we heard it. The unmistakable sound of a woman's laughter echoing through the ship. Captain Fenton stood at the bow, staring into the darkness, and whispered, "We're close." But the look in his eyes, it wasn't determination anymore. It was fear. Even he couldn't deny it any longer. Something was out there. Something was waiting for us. And then, the storm hit. Waves taller than our masts crashed down on us, tossing the ship like a toy in a child's hands. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the ghostly ship beside us. Still there, still watching. But this time, it wasn't empty. Figures, shadowy, skeletal figures, stood on the deck, staring at us with hollow eyes. And at the helm, I saw her, Captain Sybil Blackwater, her long black hair whipping in the wind, her eyes glowing with a sickly green light. "Turn back!" I screamed. But it was too late. The ship was pulled toward the reef, as if an invisible hand was dragging us. The rocks tore into the hull, and we started sinking fast. Panic set in. Men were thrown overboard, swallowed by the black water. The sea witches had come for their prize. I'll never forget the moment Captain Fenton fell. One of the shadowy figures reached out, touched him, and he froze. His eyes turned black, his skin pale, and he let out a blood-curdling scream before he collapsed, dead on the deck. And then, nothing. The ship went down, and I was the only one left alive. Or so I thought. But you see, the curse doesn't let you go that easily. I escaped the wreckage, drifted for days until a passing merchant ship picked me up. But ever since that night, I've been haunted by the sea witch's whispers. They never left me. I see her in my dreams, Sybil Blackwater, every night, watching, waiting. And I know she's coming for me, just like she's coming for you now that you've heard her story. Now let me ask you, do you believe in curses? Because if you don't, you might want to rethink that. What would you do if you were in my shoes? And most importantly, do you think you would have survived? Tell me in the comments below. Also, let me know, where are you watching from? Let's see who's brave enough to admit they've heard Sybil's name now. And don't forget to hit the like button if you're enjoying the story. Because trust me, it only gets worse from here. But trust me when I say, the story doesn't end there. After I was rescued, I thought I was free. I thought I had escaped the curse. But it wasn't long before I realized that the sea witches had their claws deep in me. At night I would wake up to the sound of the ocean, even though I was miles away from the sea. The whispers followed me, faint at first, but growing louder each night. Jack, Jack, we're still waiting. I tried to ignore them. They were eager, just like we had been. Eager to claim the gold, the jewels, the fortune that lay beneath the waves. But I knew what was really waiting for us. As we neared Dead Man's Reef, the fog rolled in again, thick and suffocating. The sea turned black, just like before. And then the whispers began. Jack, Jack, it's time. I could feel the cold hand of the sea witches closing around me. I could see their ghostly ship in the distance, and there, at the helm, was Sybil Blackwater, waiting for me. But this time, I wasn't afraid, because I had a plan. Now here's a question for you, my friend. What would you do in my place? Would you sacrifice another soul to save your own? Or would you face the curse head on, knowing it would drag you into the depths of the ocean forever? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the like button if you're hooked on the story so far. Trust me, it only gets darker from here. As the ship crept closer to Dead Man's Reef, I could feel the tension growing thicker with every passing moment. The crew was on edge, sensing that something wasn't right. But they had no idea what kind of hell awaited them. They trusted me, just like my old crew had trusted me. And that's what made this so much harder. But the Sea Witches didn't care about my guilt, my hesitation. They only cared about one thing: the sacrifice. The fog wrapped around us like a noose, and the wind died, leaving us drifting in eerie silence. The only sound was the gentle lap of the waves against the hull. The crew exchanged nervous glances, whispering among themselves. That's when I heard it again. Jack, Jack, we're here. Sybil Blackwater's voice slithered into my mind, sending chills down my spine. I knew what I had to do. I had to lead the crew into the heart of the reef. But my legs felt like they were made of stone. How could I willingly send them to their deaths? One of the crewmen, a young lad named Peter, approached me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Captain, what's going on? This doesn't feel right." He was right. Nothing about this felt right. But there was no turning back now. I forced a smile. "Don't worry, lad. We're close. Just keep the course steady." My voice cracked, betraying the calm I was trying to project. We sailed deeper into the fog, the jagged rocks of Dead Man's Reef looming ahead like the teeth of a monstrous beast. The crew worked tirelessly to navigate through the treacherous waters, unaware that they were heading straight into a trap. And then the whispers started again. But this time, it wasn't just in my head. The entire crew heard it. Their heads snapped around, searching for the source of the eerie voices. They gripped their weapons tightly, their faces etched with terror. The whispers echoed across the deck, soft and seductive, like the call of a siren. "Come closer. Come to us." One by one, the crew began to fall under the spell. Their eyes glazed over, and they moved as if in a trance, drawn toward the edge of the ship. I tried to stop them, to snap them out of it, but it was no use. The Sea Witches had them now. The first man, a grizzled old sailor named Thomas, reached the edge and threw himself into the water without a second thought. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just sank beneath the waves, his body disappearing into the dark depths. The others followed, one after the other, until only Peter and I remained. Peter was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "Captain, please. We need to leave. We have to get out of here." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But there was no escape. Not for me. Not for him. "It's too late," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They've already claimed us." Peter looked at me, confusion and betrayal flashing in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, the sea began to churn. The water around the ship bubbled and frothed, and from the depths, the ghostly ship of Sybil Blackwater rose once more. There she stood, at the helm, her long black hair billowing in the wind, her green eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Her crew of the damned surrounded her, their skeletal hands gripping the tattered sails. "Welcome back, Jack," she called out, her voice dripping with malice. "You've brought us another soul, just as we agreed." Peter's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. He turned to me, betrayal and fear etched on his face. You knew this was going to happen?" I couldn't look him in the eyes. "I'm sorry, Peter. I didn't have a choice." Sybil's laughter echoed across the water, a chilling sound that froze my blood. "You always have a choice, Jack. But now, it's time to pay the price." The ghostly crew reached out, their skeletal hands grabbing at Peter, pulling him toward the edge of the ship. He struggled, screamed, begged for his life. But it was no use. As they dragged him toward the water, he locked eyes with me one last time. "Please, Captain, don't let them take me." But I was frozen, helpless, just like before. With a final desperate scream, Peter was pulled beneath the waves. The water stilled, and the ghostly ship began to sink back into the depths, taking its victims with it. I was alone, again. But this time something was different. The whispers had stopped. For the first time in years, the curse was silent. I collapsed to my knees, staring out at the still water, my mind reeling. The sea witches had taken their sacrifice. They had claimed another soul. But I wasn't free. Not yet. Because as I sat there, staring into the abyss, I heard her voice one last time. "This isn't over, Jack. Not yet." The silence after Peter's disappearance was deafening, the kind that crawls under your skin and makes you question your own sanity. I was alone on that cursed ship, drifting aimlessly in the fog, with the weight of my past choices pressing down on me. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one darker than the last. Could this really be the end of it? Or was it just the beginning? Hours passed, maybe days. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. I just stared into the horizon, waiting for something, anything, to happen. That's when I noticed the fog beginning to lift. The sea around me grew clearer, revealing an island in the distance. It wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. The jagged cliffs and black sand beaches gave it an ominous air, as if the very land itself was cursed. And yet something about it that called to me. Maybe it was the whispers that had once haunted me. Maybe it was the promise of answers, or maybe it was Zybil. I didn't know, but I had to go there. I had to see it for myself. I steered the ship toward the island, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. As I neared the shore, I noticed something strange. The waters around the island were unnaturally calm, too calm, and the wind had completely died. It was as if the island itself controlled the sea, luring in those foolish enough to approach. With a heavy heart, I anchored the ship just off the coast and lowered the small rowboat into the water. Every stroke of the oars felt like a battle against an unseen force, but eventually, I reached the shore. The black sand crunched beneath my boots as I stepped onto the beach. The air was thick and oppressive, like the island itself was alive and breathing. The cliffs loomed overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift as if watching my every move. I felt a shiver run down my spine. As I made my way inland, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The path before me twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the island. Strange symbols were carved into the rocks, symbols I recognized from the sea witch's lair. They were warnings, curses, but I pressed on. Finally, I reached the center of the island, where a massive stone altar stood. It was ancient, worn by centuries of weather and time. And there, standing before it, was Zybil. She looked just as she had the day I first met her, beautiful, dangerous, and filled with a power that was beyond comprehension. Her green eyes glowed in the dim light, and a wicked smile spread across her lips. "You've come," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "I knew you would." I clenched my fists, anger boiling inside me. "What do you want from me, Zybil? You've taken everything, my crew, my soul. What more could you possibly need?" She laughed, a cold, chilling sound that echoed across the island. "Oh, Jack, you still don't understand, do you? This was never about taking. It's about giving." I took a step back, confusion washing over me. "What are you talking about?" Sybil's smile widened as she stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. You were chosen, Jack. Chosen to be a part of something far greater than yourself. The sea witches, the curse. It was all a test, and you've passed. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of her words. Passed? What test? She gestured to the altar, where strange glowing symbols began to appear. The test of loyalty. The test of sacrifice. You've proven yourself time and time again. And now, it's time for you to take your place among the immortals. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. Immortals? What are you talking about? Sybil's eyes sparkled with a sinister light. The sea witches are not bound by time or death, Jack. We exist beyond the mortal realm. And now... So I took another step back, my mind racing. This was madness. I never wanted this, I shouted, my voice shaking. I just wanted to be free of the curse. Sybil's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold disdain. You can't escape your fate, Jack. It was sealed the moment you set sail all those years ago. The only question now is, will you embrace it, or will you fight it? I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Could I really join them? Become one of the sea witches? The thought was both terrifying and tempting. Immortality, power beyond imagination. But at what cost? Suddenly the whispers returned, louder than ever before. They filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts, urging me to make a choice, to surrender, to give in. Join us, Jack. Join us. I shook my head, trying to clear my mind. But the voices only grew louder. My vision blurred and I stumbled forward, my knees buckling beneath me. I could feel the power of the island, the weight of the curse pressing down on me. And then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer on the island. I was standing on the deck of the ship, the fog thick around me once more. The sea was calm, the air still. But something was different. I could feel it in my bones. I wasn't alone. I turned, and there, standing beside me, was Sybil. But she wasn't the same. Her form was more ethereal, her features softer, almost human. She smiled at me, a genuine smile, not the cold, calculating one I had grown used to. You made the right choice, Jack, she said softly. Welcome to eternity. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Had I truly made the choice? Had I really embraced the curse? Or had the curse embraced me? Now it's your turn to decide. Do you think Jack made the right choice? Or was it all part of Sybil's plan from the beginning? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're ready for the next part of Jack's story, hit that like button. There's still so much more to uncover. I stood there, on the deck of the cursed ship, staring into Sybil's glowing green eyes. Her words echoed in my mind. Welcome to eternity. Eternity. A concept that once seemed distant and abstract was now my reality. The fog that had once surrounded us began to dissipate, revealing a night sky full of stars, twinkling like distant promises of freedom. But I knew better. There was no escape now, no turning back. I had crossed the threshold, stepped into the abyss, and become part of something far greater and far darker than I ever imagined. Sybil's ethereal form shimmered in the moonlight, her presence more ghostly than ever before. She wasn't like the woman I first met. She was something else entirely. The sea witches had claimed her, molded her into their own, and now they had me too. What happens now? I asked, my voice low, the weight of my decisions sinking in. Sybil smiled, that same chilling, knowing smile that haunted my dreams. Now you learn. You see, the sea witches are bound to the waters, and with your acceptance, so are you. You'll sail these seas for eternity, claiming those who cross paths with the curse. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Claiming them? You mean killing them? Her smile widened. Not killing, Jack. Reaping, collecting. The seas are hungry, always demanding more souls. But you don't have to worry. Those we take are lost, unworthy. Like your crew, they were chosen for a reason. I felt a pang of guilt twist in my stomach. The faces of my crew flashed in my mind. Peter, James, all the men I had led into this nightmare. They had trusted me, and I had doomed them to this fate. And what about me? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Am I doomed to this too? Sybil's gaze softened, her expression almost tender. You chose this path, Jack. But it's not a punishment. It's a reward. You'll live forever, sailing the seas, wielding powers beyond your imagination. You'll never grow old, never die. The ocean will be yours. Her words were meant to comfort me, but they only filled me with dread. Immortality wasn't a gift. It was a curse, to sail these haunted waters for eternity, with no escape, no end. What kind of life was that? I glanced around the ship, the same ship that had been my home for so many years. The wood creaked under my weight, and the sails fluttered in the soft breeze. The stars above seemed to watch, indifferent to the fate that had befallen me. But then something caught my eye. Far in the distance, through the thinning fog, I saw something. It was faint, but it was there. A small, flickering light. It wasn't from the moon or the stars. It was something else. Something human. A ship. I turned to Sybil, my heart racing. What's that? She followed my gaze, her expression unreadable. Another soul, perhaps. Sybil tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. What are you thinking, Jack? I didn't answer. My mind was racing. Could it be? Was there a way out of this? A way to break the curse? The thought seemed impossible, but I had to try. I had to believe there was still hope, some way to undo what I had done. Without another word, I turned and ran to the helm, gripping the wheel with both hands. The ship groaned as I steered it towards the distant light, the sails catching the wind as we picked up speed. "Jack!" Sybil called out, her voice sharp with warning. "What are you doing? You can't outrun the curse." But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had to try. I had to believe that there was still a way out, a way to free myself from this nightmare. The ship surged forward, cutting through the dark waters like a knife. The light grew closer, brighter, until I could make out the shape of the ship. A large, imposing vessel with tattered sails and a ghostly glow. It was unlike any ship I had ever seen. But then, as we drew near, I realized something was wrong. The ship wasn't just glowing, it was decaying. The wood was rotting, the sails were torn, and the crew— My name's Ethan. I'm a 27-year-old guy from Boston. I'd been bouncing around between jobs for a while, never really finding anything that stuck. But when I saw the listing for a crew member on a shipping vessel, I thought, why not? It paid well, offered long stretches of time at sea, and I figured it would be a good way to clear my head. What I didn't expect was for it to become a nightmare. The ship, an old cargo vessel called the Mistral, had been around for decades. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. When I first boarded, I was greeted by the captain, an old man named Captain Graves. His face was weathered from years at sea, and he had this unsettling air about him, like he knew things he'd never share with anyone. There were 5 of us on the crew. Myself, a guy named Marcus from Detroit, a young woman named Sophie who handled communications, and 2 engineers, Tim and Greg. We all got along pretty well, at least in the beginning. The first week or so was pretty normal. We spent our days maintaining the ship, making sure the cargo was secure, and dealing with the usual challenges of life at sea. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, Captain Graves called us all together one evening, just after dinner. He looked at each of us, his eyes dark, serious. "There are a few protocols you need to follow while you're on this ship," he said. His voice was deep, almost like a growl. These aren't negotiable. If you break them, things happen. I remember laughing at first, thinking it was just some old sailor superstition, but the look on his face stopped me cold. There are 3 rules, he continued. The first, never, and I mean never, be on deck alone after midnight. The second, if you hear knocking on your cabin door between 3 and 4 a.m., do not open it, no matter what. And the third, if you see anything, or anyone, out at sea that looks like a person, ignore it. You hear me? Ignore it. We all exchanged uneasy glances, but no one questioned him. Maybe we should have. The first couple of nights after that were quiet. Nothing strange happened, and I started to think the captain was just trying to scare us. But on the 4th night, I woke up around 3:30 a.m. My cabin was small, barely enough room for a bed and a tiny desk. The sound of the ocean was usually soothing, but that night, there was something different. Something off. I heard it then, a soft knock on my door. At first I thought I was imagining things, but then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My heart started racing. I remembered the captain's warning, do not open the door. I lay there frozen, listening. The knocking didn't stop. It continued, slow and steady, as if whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew I was awake. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to ignore it, to stay put. But the knocking, it was relentless. I don't know how long it went on, but eventually, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. The next morning, I asked Sophie and Marcus if they had heard anything. Sophie shook her head, but Marcus looked pale, like he hadn't slept. He avoided my eyes and muttered something about bad dreams. I didn't push him, but I knew. He'd heard it too. A few days later, something even stranger happened. It was around 11 p.m., and I was on deck with Greg, one of the engineers. We were doing a routine check of the cargo when Greg suddenly stopped. He was staring out at the horizon, his face pale. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. There, just beyond the ship, was a figure. At first, I thought it was someone swimming, someone lost at sea. But as I looked closer, I realized they weren't swimming. They were floating, perfectly still, their head barely above the water, eyes wide open, staring straight at us. Greg took a step forward, like he was going to call out to them, but I grabbed his arm. "No," I whispered. "Ignore it." His face twisted in confusion, but then I saw the recognition in his eyes. He remembered the captain's rule. If you see anything, or anyone, out at sea, ignore it. We stood there, frozen, watching as the figure slowly disappeared beneath the waves, like it had never been there at all. When we told the captain the next morning, he didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and told us to forget about it. But how could I? How could any of us forget something like that? Things only got worse from there. Every night the knocking would return. Every night it seemed to get louder, more insistent. And every night I fought the urge to open the door. I knew, deep down, that if I did, I wouldn't be standing here now, telling you this story. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my cabin. Slow, shuffling footsteps, like someone was dragging their feet. I didn't dare open the door, but I peeked through the tiny crack between the floor and the door. I saw shadows, more than one. They were moving slowly just outside, but there was no sound, no voices, just silence, except for those footsteps. I stayed awake until sunrise, too terrified to sleep. When I finally ventured out, I found Marcus in the galley, staring at the floor. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Did you hear them?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "It's getting worse," he muttered. "We need to leave this ship." I wanted to agree with him. Every part of me wanted to get off the Mistral and never look back. But we were in the middle of the ocean. There was nowhere to go. That's when Sophie came in, looking as pale as we felt. "The radio," she whispered. "It's not working. I've been trying to get through to someone for hours, but nothing. It's like we're completely cut off." Captain Graves didn't seem to care. He just told us to follow the protocols and everything would be fine. But I knew, and I think the others did too, that the protocols weren't there to keep us safe. They were there to keep it out, whatever it was. Now, as I'm writing this, the knocking has started again. It's louder tonight, more frantic, like it knows I'm talking about it. And the footsteps, they're back too. But this time they're not outside my door. They're inside. The footsteps inside my cabin were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if whatever was in the room with me was sucking the life out of it. I didn't look up. I didn't want to see it, whatever it was. But I could feel it, a presence, something dark and cold hovering just out of sight. The footsteps stopped, and for a brief moment the room was deathly silent. Then a whisper, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Ethan?" It knew my name. I squeezed my eyes shut, every muscle in my body tensed. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything other than lie there, paralyzed with fear. But I couldn't. The air felt like ice, chilling me to the bone. The presence lingered just inches away, and I could feel its gaze on me, even though I couldn't see it. Seconds turned into minutes, or maybe it was hours. I couldn't tell. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that moment. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the presence was gone. The room felt empty again, but the fear remained. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the sun was streaming through the tiny porthole in my cabin. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed it all, but then I saw them. Footprints. Wet, muddy footprints leading from the door to the side of my bed. And they weren't mine. That was the last straw. I wasn't the only one who had experienced strange things, and I knew the others were just as scared as I was. We needed to get off this ship. Now. I found Marcus and Sophie in the galley again. They were pale, eyes wide with fear. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days, his hands trembling as he clutched a mug of coffee. "We need to talk to the captain," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to get out of here." Sophie nodded. "I tried the radio again this morning. Still nothing. It's like we're completely cut off." Marcus stared at the table, silent. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that had been gnawing at me for days. "It's not going to let us leave," he whispered. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down I knew he was right. We went to see Captain Graves, but when we reached the bridge, he wasn't there. In fact, the entire bridge was empty. The ship was running on autopilot, headed somewhere. We didn't know where, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. "Where is he?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. We searched the ship, but there was no sign of the captain. It was like he had vanished. The only thing we found was his cabin door, locked from the inside. Panic started to set in. Without the captain, we were alone, adrift in the middle of the ocean with no way to communicate with the outside world. And whatever was haunting this ship, it wasn't going to let us leave. That night, the knocking started again. But this time, it wasn't just at my door. It was everywhere, every cabin, every corridor. It was like the entire ship was alive with the sound of relentless, pounding knocks. I stayed in my bed, clutching the blanket like a shield. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was happening, why this was happening. But there were no answers, only fear. Then, the voices started. Not whispers this time, but loud, echoing voices that filled the air around me. They were speaking in a language I didn't understand, guttural and harsh, like something ancient and malevolent. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but the voices just got louder, more insistent. And then, through the chaos, I heard my name again. "Ethan." It was the same voice from before, cold and mocking. I knew it wasn't human, couldn't be human, but it was inside my head, and no matter what I did, I couldn't make it stop. The next morning, we found Greg, one of the engineers. He was dead, lying in a pool of his own blood in the engine room. His eyes were wide open, frozen in terror, and his hands were covered in deep, jagged cuts. It looked like he had tried to claw something, someone, away from him. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that anyone else had been there. But I knew better. I knew that whatever had killed Greg wasn't something we could fight. It wasn't something we could see. Panic spread through the remaining crew like wildfire. Tim, the other engineer, locked himself in his cabin and refused to come out. Sophie and Marcus were barely holding it together, and I could feel my own sanity slipping away, piece by piece. That's when I made the decision. We had to abandon ship. It didn't matter if we were in the middle of the ocean. It didn't matter if we didn't have a way to contact anyone. Staying on board was a death sentence. We gathered what supplies we could, loaded them into one of the lifeboats, and prepared to leave. But as we lowered the boat into the water, something stopped us. It was Sophie. She was staring out at the horizon, her face pale as a ghost. "What is it?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer. She just pointed. We followed her gaze, and that's when we saw it. A ship. Another ship, almost identical to the Mistral, sailing just a few miles away. At first, we thought it was a rescue, but then we noticed something strange. The ship wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, motionless on the water. And then I saw it. On the deck of the ship, standing perfectly still, was a figure, dressed in the same uniform as us, staring right at us. It was me. For a moment I stood there frozen, staring at the figure that was me. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was exactly me, down to the smallest detail. My heart hammered in my chest as I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Marcus must have seen it too, because his face went as white as a sheet. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Sophie backed away, her eyes wide with terror. "It's not real. It can't be real." But it was real as the cold, salty air stinging my face and the creaking of the Mistral beneath my feet. The figure on the other ship didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there, staring back at us like a reflection in a twisted mirror. "Is that you?" Marcus finally asked, his voice barely audible. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, my thoughts racing. How was it possible? How could there be another me standing on that ship, watching us, as we stared in shock? A deep, low sound echoed across the water. It wasn't the wind or the creaking of the ship. It was something else, something alive. It vibrated through the air, deep and guttural, like a growl from the depths of the ocean. "Get in the boat," I whispered. My voice was barely more than a breath, but Marcus and Sophie didn't need any convincing. They scrambled into the lifeboat, and I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. We started lowering the boat into the water, but as we did, the other ship, my ship, began to move. Slowly at first, like a shadow drifting across the water. The figure on the deck remained still, watching us, but I could feel something shifting in the air. The growling sound grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the bones of the ship. And then it hit me. It wasn't a ship. It was something else, something alive. The growling wasn't coming from the water. It was coming from under the ship. As the lifeboat touched the surface of the ocean, the water around us began to churn. Waves crashed against the side of the Mistral, tossing the lifeboat like a toy. "What's happening?" Sophie screamed, clutching the side of the boat as it rocked violently. "I don't know," Marcus shouted back. "Just row! We need to get out of here!" We grabbed the oars and started rowing as fast as we could, but it was like rowing through mud. The water resisted us, thick and heavy, as if something was pulling us back toward the ship. I glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it. The figure on the other ship. It wasn't alone anymore. More figures had appeared, all of them identical to the crew of the Mistral. There was Marcus, Sophie, Greg, even Captain Graves standing with the others, their blank eyes fixed on us. "Row faster!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But it was no use. The water around us was boiling now, bubbling and frothing like something massive was stirring beneath the surface. Then, without warning, a massive wave rose up behind us, towering over the boat. We barely had time to react before it crashed down, flipping the lifeboat and plunging us into the freezing water. The cold hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I struggled to the surface, gasping for breath, the salt water burning my eyes and throat. "Sophie! Marcus!" I shouted, my voice lost in the roar of the waves. I couldn't see them. The water was too rough, the darkness too thick. I thrashed around, trying to find something to hold on to, but there was nothing. Just the endless churning sea and the sound of that awful growling beneath me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something large, something massive, was rising from the depths of the ocean. It wasn't a wave. It was something else. Something alive. A shadow, bigger than anything I had ever seen, began to emerge from the water. I could barely make out its shape, but it was enough to know that it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could understand. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow disappeared beneath the surface, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I don't remember much after that. I must have passed out from the cold, because the next thing I knew, I was lying on a beach, the sound of waves crashing in the distance. I was alive. But I was alone. There was no sign of Sophie or Marcus, no sign of the Mistral. Just me, lying on the sand, staring up at the sky, trying to make sense of what had happened. For days I wandered the beach, hoping to find some clue, some explanation. But there was nothing. The only thing I found was a single wet footprint in the sand, leading away from the shore. And it wasn't mine. I'm writing this now as a warning. If you ever find yourself on a ship called the Mistral, don't board it. Don't even think about it. Whatever is out there on the ocean, whatever it is that took my crew, it's still out there, and it's waiting. But the question that haunts me the most, the question that keeps me awake at night, is this: who or what was standing on that other ship? Now I have to ask you, what do you think happened to Sophie and Marcus? Could they still be out there somewhere? Or is something else controlling them? And more importantly, where do you think this other ship came from? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you. I spent weeks, months maybe, trying to figure it out. I went through every log, every record, every piece of evidence I could find. But there was nothing. No trace of the Mistral, no report of its disappearance, no missing crew, nothing. It was as if the ship had never existed, as if the sea had swallowed it whole and erased it from reality. I reached out to other sailors, old-timers who had been around longer than I had. But whenever I mentioned the Mistral, they gave me the same look, half disbelief, half fear. They would shake their heads and mutter about old superstitions, about things better left alone. And then they would always tell me the same thing: some ships aren't meant to return. Months turned into years, and I tried to move on. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting. The dreams started soon after I got back on land. At first, they were vague, just shadows and water, the sound of waves crashing endlessly. But then they got clearer, too clear. In my dreams, I was always back on the ocean. I could hear the creaking of the Mistral under my feet, smell the salt in the air, feel the cold wind on my face. And always, without fail, I would see them, the figures. They were standing on the deck of the other ship, watching me, waiting. But here's the thing. The longer I stayed away, the less I started to recognize them. They weren't just copies of my crew anymore. They had started to change. Their faces became twisted, their eyes hollow. It was as if the ocean itself had warped them, made them into something else. And then there was me. In every dream I saw myself, standing with them, watching myself from across the water. And every time I looked a little less human. I kept quiet about the dreams, tried to bury the memories, but they wouldn't stay buried. One night, after a particularly vivid dream, I woke up with an overwhelming sense of dread. I knew something had changed. I wasn't sure how, but I could feel it. I rushed to the mirror, expecting to see my reflection, but what I saw wasn't me. My reflection was wrong, just like in the dreams. My face was slightly off, like the features didn't quite fit together the way they should. My eyes were cold, empty, and staring back at me with a knowing look. It was as if the person in the mirror wasn't me at all, but something that had taken my place. I stumbled back, shaking, heart pounding, and in that moment, I knew. I couldn't run from it anymore. A few days later, I got an anonymous note slipped under my door. It was written in messy, scrawled handwriting. No signature, no indication of who sent it. It only had one line. "The Mistral sails again." Now I'm sitting here, writing this, knowing that I can't avoid it any longer. I don't know what's waiting for me out there, but I'm going back. Back to the sea, back to where it all began. There's something I need to face, something I need to understand. Maybe I'll find Sophie and Marcus. Maybe I'll find that other ship. Or maybe I'll find myself, the version of me that's been haunting my dreams. But whatever happens, I have to know the truth. I leave you with one final question. Would you board the Mistral? Thank you for staying with me through this story. It's a journey I never expected to take, and I hope you found it as unsettling as I have. And as always, don't forget to comment. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Could you face the unknown? Would you follow the call of the sea? And one more thing. Tell me, where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments.